question. I believe that the bilateral commission created by HR 2070 is expected by that bill to negotiate in ways that don't make any sense within the structure of Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States. If Puerto Rico is going to debate the options that are available to it, it should be able to debate those without being nudged, guided, advised. Clarity from the federal side is a good thing, but to call it a negotiation when you have the federal government on one side and a territory on the other side that's being steered in its self-determination process, to me, it's a misnomer. That's not a negotiation. That's the federal government guiding a process by advising Puerto Rico on issues in which Puerto Rico should make its own decision instead of offering the kind of clarity that it's Congress's responsibility to provide.
Thank you. And I got 30 seconds in this term. Governor of Puerto Rico, you got a lot of experience in Congress. You were by 8 years a member of this committee in the House. Do you think establishing a constitutional convention or people elected like delegates will be the right option to express to be expressed?
The fact of the matter is that it has never been legislated in Puerto Rico itself. And people here, some were blaming the statehood party. Well, we have not been in control of the House and the Senate and the governorship always. There have been many occasions in which the House and the Senate of Puerto Rico and the governorship have been controlled by the other major party in Puerto Rico. And this concept of a status convention was never legislated. And the problem I have with it right now is that we just had a vote, a majority vote. We hadn't had a majority vote, a clear-cut majority vote in a long time dealing with the status of Puerto Rico. In 2012, we had another one. 54%
Time is up, sir.
Clearly rejected the current status. And now 53% approved statehood.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
I yield back.
I yield back.
Keeping track of overtime too. Thank you. Mr. Webster, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like
Thank
to
you, sir.
I'd like to give my time to the resident delegate from Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Congressman Webster, for yielding and for always being supportive of many of the issues regarding the island. I will continue my line of questions, and I will go now with the Governor of Puerto Rico, Mr. Pedro Pierluisi, that, as I said before, was a member of this committee of the House for 8 years, and now is the one representing the island as the elected official to carry out the results of the last election. Governor, there have been many things that have been said today here regarding how Congress is willing or not to grant statehood for Puerto Rico. You were a lawyer as well. You were a former prosecutor and Secretary of Justice locally on the island. You know the movement that gained the right of vote for women and Afro-Americans. Do you think statehood and equality is an issue of civil rights?
Definitely. That's what we're talking about mostly. It has economic development implications, quality of life implications, but at its heart, this is a civil rights issue. Somebody said it before, and I'll repeat it. 9 out of 10 American citizens living in Puerto Rico are proud American citizens. I'm talking about Puerto Ricans. I know a lot of Puerto Ricans unfortunately left the island, and now they're pursuing their dreams in the States. But the ones remaining in Puerto Rico, they're proud American citizens and proud Puerto Ricans, and that's not inconsistent. You can be a proud Puerto Rican American, like you have so many in the States. Puerto Rico will add to this nation. This nation is diverse. And of course, we're Hispanic. This would be the first truly Hispanic state. And of course, we will continue speaking Spanish, but we all aspire to be bilingual. And we will always treasure our heritage, and that's good for America. It's good that we have this history, that we have these customs. That's why people come to Puerto Rico and visit. That's why people come to Puerto Rico and invest in Puerto Rico and retire in Puerto Rico. It's not inconsistent. What we're talking about here is finding a way forward. And the people of Puerto Rico express their will. And the ones here talking about that there was no debate, where are they? Where were they? Were they in the moon? In Mars? We know how to debate these issues. We have been debating them for too long. Everybody in Puerto Rico knows what independence is all about. Everybody in Puerto Rico knows what free association is all about. Everybody in Puerto Rico knows what the current status means. We suffer through it every day. And everybody knows as well what statehood means. Enough of this debate. The ball is in Congress's court. It is time for Congress to address this issue. And I have no doubt if Congress offers statehood to Puerto Rico, you will get an overwhelming vote from the people of Puerto Rico accepting it. That's why I'm not hesitating. That's why our resident commissioner is not hesitating. And you will have a diverse Puerto Rico with Republicans such as Jennifer Gonzalez and Democrats like me. And we will enrich this nation when the time comes and we become the 51st state of the union.
Governor, one of the questions that was made a few minutes ago, and Congressman Case from Hawaii was saying about the percentage and how Hawaii that was voted for statehood and the percentage about that. Do you have an expectation that once there is a bill approved in Congress, like the one we are supporting today, and that becomes a law, that the statehood support will grow on the island once Congress make a formal offer to the island?
I have no doubt some of the ones participating in this hearing, every time, I mean, they don't miss a step saying that Congress will never offer statehood to Puerto Rico. They have been encouraging the people of Puerto Rico to doubt Congress, to doubt this nation. They have been saying, we don't deserve it. They're not going to give it to us. Well, I know the time will come when this offer will be made and the people of Puerto Rico will see that it is for real, and they'll go out and they'll vote overwhelmingly for statehood. I have whatever requirement is imposed on us that is reasonable, we will meet because we want to become the 51st state.
Thank you, Governor, and now you're back.
Gentlelady yields. Let me now recognize gentleman from New York, Mr. Torres. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Puerto Ricans on the island are citizens of the United States, and we are here today to debate whether those citizens should be equal. And the mere fact that we are even debating the legal equality of Puerto Ricans as American citizens is a tragedy for both democracy and decolonization. And history will not judge us kindly for the grave harm that we have done and continue to do to the people of Puerto Rico. If Puerto Ricans are American citizens, why not make them equal under the law? If Puerto Ricans have long been and largely wish to remain citizens, which has been borne out repeatedly, there are only two options that preserve citizenship. There is the status quo, which means colonialism, and then there's statehood, which means legal equality. The single most egregious example of colonialism is the Financial Control Board, which represents a cardinal sin against the sovereignty and self-determination of Puerto Rico. The fact is, if Puerto Rico were a state, there would be no Financial Control Board. Unlike colonies, states have rights under the United States Constitution. The absence of statehood has left Puerto Rico wide open to colonization at the hands of the Financial Control Board. The United States Congress that gave us the Financial Control Board is the same Congress that now wishes to deny Puerto Rico the right to exercise self-determination through a plebiscite. Now, I imagine there are powerful interests that have a stake in the status quo of colonialism. But if you're a corporation that exploits Puerto Rico as a tax haven, you have a powerful incentive to sabotage statehood. But if you're an everyday Puerto Rican who seeks to become an equal citizen of the United States, who seeks to have the right to vote in presidential and congressional elections, who seeks to have your voice heard, to have a seat at the table, and to get your fair share of federal resources and representation, then you have every reason to support statehood. And that is precisely what a majority of the Puerto Rican electorate voted to do in November of 2020. And instead of respecting the will of the people, the United States Congress has chosen to ignore it. And not only has Congress chosen to ignore the results of the plebiscite, members of Congress are proposing to micromanage the process by which Puerto Ricans make decisions about their own status. The patronizing paternalism of Congress should never be mistaken for self-determination. True self-determination means that the people on the island have a right to decide not only what to decide, but how to decide. You know, Congress should practice the Hippocratic Oath and do no harm. When the people speak, the proper role of Congress is to listen. The people of Puerto Rico have spoken through a democratic process. Congress ought to listen to the people. Congress ought to legislate what the people voted for. And Congress ought to abolish the Financial Control Board, which is an abomination. That, to me, is true decolonization. Everything else is a red herring, a distraction masquerading as decolonization. I have a question for the governor. I've never met the governor. It's good to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Would likely yield 2 U.S. senators and 5 members of Congress. Regardless of where one stands on the question of status, we all have a vested interest in securing more resources for Puerto Rico. Is it fair to say that 2 U.S. senators and 5 members of Congress would likely mean more resources for Puerto Rico, which is an outcome that all of us share?
But of course, they would be our gladiators. They would be fighting for us whenever we face a natural disaster, whenever the nation as a whole is facing a pandemic like the one we are dealing with at the moment. We have no voice, no vote in the Senate. We have friends, colleagues in the Senate that come to assist us, but it is not the same. And we only have a great resident commissioner, but it's only one without a vote in the House. We would have at least 4, perhaps 5. You don't need to know much about politics to realize that that would make a big difference. And voting for the president. Presidents don't visit Puerto Rico, rarely so. Why? They don't need our vote. I have no doubt presidents would be visiting, candidates for president would be visiting to make commitments to the American citizens of Puerto Rico when they're aspiring to the highest office in this nation. That makes a difference. That's going to make a difference. That would be democratic. Our status is not democratic.
Time is up. Gentleman yields back. Let me now recognize Representative Carroll from New Mexico. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to yield my time to Representative Gonzalez Colon.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Harrell, for yielding, and appreciate you being in the hearing the whole afternoon. Really, that means a lot for the people of Puerto Rico, knowing that members of Congress, even when there's votes being called, are participating in this hearing. That is an answer for the November election. So I want to say thank you. I want to make questions to Professor Ponce, and this is not that I'm fixated with your statement, is that you're the constitutionalist here, the professor, who can clarify many of the words that are being put in some bills trying to be constitutional. And you just said many times today that no. I know that in the past you have argued that statehood is not just about equality, that it's also about empowerment. Could you elaborate on this idea and how saying here in Congress, having leverage, and I do know about that because I cannot vote on the floor. I mean, I can vote on amendments, but not on the floor on regular bills. And we got that situation during the last 4 years. How do you think Puerto Rico can achieve a more economic process by having statehood?
Well, I frankly can't put it better than you and the governor have, but I can add this. It isn't only that Puerto Rico would have 2 senators and 4 or 5 representatives and the presidential vote. It's also that statehood itself as a status would guarantee equality in legislation that the federal government passes to aid and address issues in the states. As a territory, Puerto Rico is subject either to exclusion from certain programs, such as SSI, or to caps in benefit programs. So there's no comparison between the current situation in which Puerto Rico has no voting representation whatsoever in the federal government. It has you, thank goodness, but it does not have voting representation in the federal government, and a situation in which it is empowered based proportionately to its population, like any other jurisdiction under the United States, with equality in the vote. So that difference is profound, and it is also a constitutionally protected difference because states are treated equivalently under the Constitution. So it's both the presence of voting representatives and the status of statehood that would guarantee equality for Puerto Ricans.
You just said, well, and I've been fighting for the inclusion of Puerto Rico in many federal programs as Governor Pierluisi did while he was in Congress. However, some people talk about parity without statehood, and that means it's leaving Puerto Rico at the mercy of the decisions in Congress, not having their elected officials to take part in that decision process. And as a territory, we always run the risk that the next Congress or the next administration can simply decide whether or not we will be treated equally or not. Even President Bush established an executive order that Puerto Rico should be treated equally in all federal programs as a state. But yet, administration changed, and that executive order has been interpreted in many different ways. My question will be to you. What options of status will guarantee the U.S. citizenship for Puerto Rico?
So specifically as to the question of citizenship, only statehood guarantees citizenship for current U.S. citizens in Puerto Rico and going forward. Under the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause, if Puerto Rico becomes a state, then birthright citizenship will exist in Puerto Rico now and going forward. Other options, the United States has the power to grant citizenship anywhere in the world that it wants. So advocates of free association argue that free association should come with U.S. citizenship. The truth is that I understand the difference that Governor Acevedo Vilá pointed to, that the other free associated states with relations to the United States weren't citizens beforehand, but it's really important to understand the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas had a choice to become a free associated state or to enter into a different kind of arrangement with the US, which ended up being territorial, and they made that choice in order to preserve citizenship. The United States could have granted that citizenship, but it didn't want to a free associated state. And even if it did, and this is what the people have to understand when they consider the options, the United States could always stop granting birthright citizenship going forward in a free associated state. So even if it was preserved for some time, it could always be taken away. Only statehood guarantees it now and going forward.
Thank you, Professor. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Graves, you're recognized, sir, for 5 minutes. Mr. Graves? Let me ask the ranking member, is Mr. Graves available, or was we were notified by the...
I'm sorry, Mr.
Thank you, sir. You're recognized, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I've been in and out of the hearing today and trying to listen as much as I can. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. I got a couple of questions. One, I heard one of the previous members talking about this treating Puerto Rico as a colony and disrespecting the citizens. Look, I want to remind everybody here today that in the aftermath of the just awful hurricanes that the island experienced, that we provided billions and billions of dollars for the island for restoration and disaster recovery efforts that Congresswoman Colon Gonzalez fought for to make sure that that the citizens of Puerto Rico would be treated properly. And let's be clear that these dollars were well beyond the capability of the Puerto Rican government, and we were there, and no one was disrespected. In fact, if you were to go through and do an analysis at the cost per capita, it's probably one of the highest allocations in history in terms of dollars per person that was provided, and that's a result, a direct result of Puerto Rico's delegates' hard efforts up in the Congress. Governor, it's nice to see you again. I hope you're doing well. I want to ask you a very quick question because I've got some other ones. Can you just briefly respond? How will the Puerto Rican citizens respond to federal taxation that they would be open to? And just being the governor, kind of maybe just briefly explain, you have control over that now. You have the ability to tax at whatever rate you want effectively. And if now the federal government's going to come in and tax as well, is that a benefit? How will the citizens respond? Could you just briefly respond to that?
Yeah, because of our income levels, a considerable number of our residents wouldn't pay federal income taxes. Actually, in the mainland, about 46% of the population do not pay federal income taxes. So in Puerto Rico, it would be higher than that. At the corporate level, we would have to transition. We would have to transition this issue, and obviously Congress would have to step in the way. It makes no sense to admit a territory into the union and to affect the territory. You would be assisting the territory in joining the union. As an incorporated territory, we do not pay federal income taxes on income we earn in Puerto Rico. We pay payroll taxes. And a lot of the American corporations doing in Puerto Rico actually pay federal income taxes because they operate through divisions in Puerto Rico. On the manufacturing side, they're basically treated as foreign. And they are treated like investing in Puerto Rico is like investing in Ireland or in Singapore. That's an area in which we would have to transition. But the tax uniformity clause of the U.S. Constitution shouldn't be viewed as static. It would allow, in the circumstance like Puerto Rico is facing, for a transition. And that's what I envision happening here.
Thank you, Governor. I appreciate that answer. I also was trying to listen, and I hope that I caught all this accurately. But Governor Ciro Vila, you campaigned against statehood, and you had run an election and didn't win that election. But and I want to understand it
Congressman, sorry, can you repeat, because I lost the audio for a minute.
Oh, yikes.
No, now I'm hearing you, but I lost you in the middle of a question.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay.
I'm sorry about that. I was saying that that you campaigned against statehood and didn't win on that platform. And I'm trying to understand the official representative of the Popular Democrat Party. As I understand, Jose Dalmu is actually on record against HR 2070. Yet I think you may be advocating differently, and I'm just trying to understand kind of the political dynamics there.
No, the Popular Democratic Party is against 1522. In terms of 2070, I'm not here on behalf of the Popular Democratic Party, so I guess at some time he was going to be invited. But I just want to make a clarification. Yes, I ran in the last election. I lost the election. I have heard here a lot of people saying that statehood got more votes than any of the elected officials. But you know what? The vote against statehood, the no vote, got more votes than any of the elected officials. People voted more against statehood than they voted for Resident Commissioner Gonzalez and Governor Pierluisi. That only shows that we are divided, on this issue, and that process of November 2020 was not really a balanced and fair process.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I know I'm over time, but I cut out. I just want to make for the record, it was my understanding that the new chairman of the Popular Democrat Party, Jose Dalmu, was actually on record against HR 2070. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Grave. Gentleman yields. No one else to be recognized. I will take my opportunity now to ask some couple of quick questions, and then in some of the overtime, let me indulge the members with a couple of points. First of all, in terms of, it was brought up once, and then it was brought up in the communication from Ms. Gonzalez Colon and from the ranking member, Mr. Westerman, about doing in-person meetings insofar as those become important, and that's the way to go, and that we could be much more productive, and et cetera. Well, I don't disagree. The first thing I would love to do is to have in-person meetings so that these discussions could occur. The issue is for all the members to know, in spite of the deployment of vaccines, COVID cases continue to rise. In some parts of the country, cases are surging. In the last 7 days, CDC has reported over 450,000 new COVID cases. And the Office of the Attending Physician continues to adamantly recommend that we maximize the utilization of remote work. We don't know the vaccine status of all members and staff, and that's another reason. And so as this horrific situation that we all find ourselves in, not just Congress, then we'll begin to accelerate and put in the protocols necessary to have more in-person meetings. I'm not enjoying the process as we have now, but this is the process we have. And the issue of Puerto Rico and status was something that there was criticism that we were delaying this and that it wasn't getting done. Well, it was getting done, and so we had to have the reason we did it, and we did it remotely, is that that we needed to expedite this and have this discussion and begin the deliberations that I think are critical to dealing with this question. The other part that's critical in dealing with this question, my friends, is that there's a division, not only a division in Puerto Rico in terms of opinion about statehood or another status, but also a difference of opinion within Congress, and a difference of opinion in the U.S. Senate, a difference of opinion in the House of Representatives. And so going forward, these kinds of discussions and deliberations are critical. Like it or not, it is, and sometimes I like it less, is Congress has a critical role in this decision and how it's going to be made. And I recognize the difficulty for some members, but I also recognize that it's going to come a point where we're going to have to move forward on it. And I find it interesting that if, let's say hypothetically, whichever one of these bills the House passed, that there could be a significant difference of opinion in the U.S. Senate. We've been communicating with the Biden White House through their insular affairs and the domestic council and other leadership in the White House, and asking for the Justice Department to issue an opinion on both pieces of legislation, and those will be forthcoming. And some of the constitutional issues that were brought up by the professor are part of the log of questions that we asked, including the binding nature in terms of us moving forward in terms of the vote that happened in November in terms of pro-statehood by the percentage that Mr. Case pointed out. Nevertheless, that's where we're at, and that information will be shared with everybody. I have two quick questions. Mr. Natal, let me ask you a question. As we were going through this discussion, I heard a couple of things today, and many of the other questions I would have asked that were on my list, other members took care of that. HR 2070, the public process, the stakeholder involvement, the community process, community-based process, in support of that process. But we heard today from primarily other panelists and some of my colleagues up here on the dais that if you support this process, you're not acknowledging the clear-cut decision that was made in November in that election, that it is an excuse to delay and for Congress to be, I think the governor put it that, not to be courageous and make a decision, and that there's unconstitutionalities associated with one, and that there is that a definitive answer has been made. So my question to you, which is the question that was directly and indirectly posed for most of this hearing, is why not just let it have an up or down referendum on the question and go forward from there? Why why is this process of public engagement so critical? And let me leave it to you for whatever answer. Then I have one more question. I'm done.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Grijalva. Well, the quick answer is this is not the first time that a referendum like this has taken place. Just to give you an idea, in the last 16 years, 10 different bills have been presented regarding the statehood issue in the United States. We have had at least 3 referendums, and regardless whether the statehood supposedly got 97% or 50.5%, a process that's born out of the lack of participation, out of exclusion, out of the imposition by one of the political parties is a process which outcome lacks democratic legitimacy. And that's why it doesn't matter if statehood got 97 3 years ago or it got 51 this time around. It's a process that was born out of the exclusion. And that's why it's so necessary that this Congress allows the people of Puerto Rico to put forward a participative, inclusive process of all non-colonial options. And I would just use this analogy, Chairman. Most individuals, and I respect that, of members of this committee have yielded their time either to Congresswoman Velasquez or Congresswoman Gonzalez because they understand that as Puerto Ricans, they know more about this than maybe they do. Well, that's what they should do with this vote and support HR 2070, yield the decision to the people of Puerto Rico and let Puerto Ricans decide.
The other question, if I may, Mr. Fuentes, given your extensive experience, the work that you've done in Puerto Rico, the work that you did with the previous administration on issues related to Puerto Rico, the hypothetical I asked earlier in my comments, the last time around, the last 4 years, there was nothing definitive coming from the previous administration. We hope to get opinion soon. And there was no movement at all in the Senate with the previous leadership at that point. In fact, part of the Senate leadership at that point said that over my dead body are we going to deal with this question of statehood or status for Puerto Rico. Do you see and then you have, like I said, the differences of opinion both in the House and in the Senate. How do you respond to the fact that we need to come to some closure, and how do we do that, given the dynamics, given the history, and given the fact that this issue is not an issue that can readily be dealt with in one vote, that it's going to require, I think, some level of deliberation and consensus, but that's going to, I leave that question to you. How do you see the progress going forward?
Well, Chairman Grijalva, thank you very much for this hearing, which is very important. The way I see it, politics are playing a role in this process that is really unacceptable. As we've discussed previously, political forecasting is even worse than weather forecasting. But as we see Puerto Ricans leaving the island and moving to the mainland to get better quality of life, what we now have is 3 million Puerto Ricans living on the island, 6 million living in the mainland in one of the 50 states. So that starts to create political power. And as that political power starts to be recognized, I believe that other voices are going to start understanding it and changing. And I would point out at Senator Scott and Senator Rubio in the U.S. Senate, both of whom recognize the importance of the Puerto Rican vote in Central Florida, and both of whom have expressed themselves in favor of statehood, but need to create the basis for them to launch the effort in the Senate. It will happen.
So it still comes down to regardless, I was going to, of the discussions about what the Senate or the House can do. I think that Congress can pass legislation, whether it is 1522 or 2070, and that becomes the law. And we could project and talk about estimating what the constitutionality or non-constitutionality of it is. But once a decision is made by this body and the other body, I think that question then becomes moot. But I want to thank all of the witnesses. I appreciate it. There's written questions that members did not get to that will be forwarded to you. I appreciate it. Governor, thank you. Mr. Rivas, thank you. And the meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.